Hey guys, hoping all is well with everybody. In this video, we're going to be starting our third read-along entitled Heroic Dogs by Aloud Jefferson. And the subtext says, True stories of incredible courage and unconditional love from man's best friend. These stories don't really go into the form of chapters, so what I'm going to be doing for the videos is breaking them in parts based on the length of the stories themselves. Okay, but let's get into our first story entitled Balto and Seppala. Balto and Seppala. Balto's story takes place around Nome, Alaska in the winter of 1925. Winter in that area means living mostly in the dark and cold. In January, the sun rises around noon and sets before 5. The winter of 1925 was the coldest one in 20 years. During January, the temperatures dipped to minus 60 and even minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. These temperatures can cause frostbite in minutes if the skin is exposed to the air. During the 1900 to 1909 Alaska gold rush, the population of Nome had grown to 20,000, but people left town shortly afterwards. By 1925, there were only 455 Alaska natives and 975 settlers from Canada, the United States, and Europe still living in the Nome area. Diphtheria outbreak. There was one doctor, 4 nurses, and a small hospital in Nome. In December 1924, Dr. Curtis Welch treated a small girl for what he thought was a simple sore throat. She died the next day, but the family wouldn't let the doctor examine her, so he didn't know what disease she had. In January 1925, Billy Barnett, a 3-year-old, became sick. This time Dr. Welch saw a thick patch at the back of Billy's throat and knew that Billy had diphtheria. What's diphtheria? This is a disease caused by bacteria, those very small organisms that you need a microscope to see. The diphtheria bacteria squirt out a poison called a toxin, which can cause fever and very sore throats. In some cases, the poison causes a gray, leathery patch to grow in the back of the throat that makes it hard to breathe. Many people died from diphtheria back then, especially children. Today we are given a vaccine so we don't get diphtheria. It's part of the DPT shots against diphtheria, pertussis, whooping cough, and tetanus given to children. Back then, the vaccine was just being developed and not accessible to the general public. The only treatment was serum containing antitoxin, which could help people fight the disease. In Nome, when Billy was diagnosed with diphtheria, the antitoxin that Dr. Welch had on hand was too old, and he was afraid to use it. The doctor had ordered new serum to the summer of 1924, but it hadn't arrived by ship before Nome was iced in for the winter. Billy died the next day. The day Billy died, another child became ill. Dr. Welch tried the old serum, but it didn't work, and she died. He then radioed for help. He needed new serum, a lot of it. Diphtheria travels through the air easily, and he was afraid everyone in Nome would get the disease. The town started that day to quarantine anyone with the disease, and one of the nurses was assigned to make sure sick people didn't come in contact with others. By January 24th, there were 20 new cases and 50 possible cases. Serum was located in Anchorage, enough to treat 30 children. But how could they get it to Nome fast enough? There were no roads, the ocean was frozen so ships couldn't come in. The only 2 airplanes in town were open cockpit biplanes with water-cooled engines, so they weren't used in the winter. The town usually got mail from Nenana, a port with open water in the winter. The mail was taken by dog sled to Nome, a distance of 674 miles. A normal mail run took 25 days. Plan A and Plan B. Plan A, the first plan they came up with, was that the serum would be sent by train to Nenana, the end of the line. Then the 2 fastest dog sled teams would be used. One team would go from Nenana to Nulato, about halfway between Nenana and Nome. The other team would start from Nome, drive to Nulato, get the serum from the first team, and return it with it to Nome. The second team had to be the best, and the best team in the area was Leonard Seppala, the musher, and his dog's team led by Togo, a Siberian husky. Seppala had come to Alaska from Norway during the gold rush and stayed to work for a gold mining company. He first used dogs to pull wheeled carts, mostly just for fun. But living in Alaska, he got interested having dogs to pull sleds over the snow. Finally, he joined others in the sport of dog sled racing. In 1913, Seppala was training some dogs for Roald Amundsen, the famous explorer, for an expedition to the South Pole. But the trip was cancelled and Seppala was given the dogs. This was his first dog team. One of the dogs, Togo, was his favorite. By 1925, Togo was still his lead racing dog despite being 12 years old, which is rather old for such a rigorous sport. Another reason for picking Seppala was that the most of the dangerous part of the journey was crossing Norton Sound. If Seppala used his shortcut both coming and going, it would save a whole day in getting the serum to Nome. Norton Sound had many perils. The winds can be fierce enough to topple the sleds. The ice can be smoothed by the winds such that the dogs have trouble even walking on it. Other times, winds and underlying sea currents can push the ice up into jagged piles, making it difficult to find a way through. Seppala had crossed Norton Sound several times. Any other musher would be more at risk of losing his sled, dogs, serum, and his own life by attempting it. So Seppala set out from Nome to Nulato with Togo and his dogs. Right after Seppala left, however, people changed their minds about Plan A and went to Plan B. In Plan B, many mushers and teams would start from roadhouses along the trail and relay the serum to Nome. With this plan, each dog team would go about 30 miles. They figured that Plan A was too much to ask of any team or musher. The teams had scheduled rest stops in between their final stops to both rest and melt the serum. The 20-pound box of serum arrived in Nenana and was picked up by Wild Bill Shannon, who wrapped it in a quilt and headed out. He arrived at his first rest stop with his face blackened by frostbite in the minus 50-degree air, and with 3 of his 9 dogs too weak to continue. 2 of the dogs died right there. When Shannon got to his next stop, they had to pour hot water over his hands to release them from the sled. Meanwhile, as the relay team was progressing, Seppala had come 170 miles from Nome, crossing Norton Sound without difficulty. He was thinking he had much further to go when he saw Ivanhoff, a musher, coming from the other direction. Ivanhoff was part of the serum relay. Ivanhoff had a rookie dog team that had run off the trail into a reindeer, and his dogs and the sled were all tangled up in a mess. He was trying to fix it when he recognized Seppala's dog team passing a little way off. Seppala had seen Ivanhoff, but didn't know he had the serum. He was bent upon reaching Nulato to get the serum and didn't want to stop to help Ivanhoff with his team. Fortunately, Ivanhoff ran yelling after Seppala and managed to turn him back. So Seppala took the serum and headed back toward Nome. Seppala crossed Norton Sound again, this time in blizzards and high winds, dodging melting ice in spots where the ice had moved and there was an open ocean water. Shortly after they crossed, the ice collapsed and floated out to sea. After crossing the Sound, Seppala and his team climbed a ridge to the top of Little McKinley, 5,000 feet high. But when Seppala reached Golovin to hand over the serum, he and his dogs had traveled 261 miles in 5 days. At Golovin, Charlie Olson took the serum to Bluff and handed it over to Gunnar Kassan. Seppala and Kassan were both employees of a gold mining company. Their boss had been the one to give the dogs first to Amundsen, and when they weren't needed for an expedition, he gave them to Seppala. When the relay teams were being formed, he had Kassan use one of Seppala's dogs, Balto, as his lead dog. And here's a picture of Balto and Gunnar Kassan. Balto was an almost pure black Siberian husky. He didn't have the white markings on his face we associate with huskies, but he did have white stockings and bib. He was a large dog with a rough coat. Leonard Seppala had never used Balto for racing as he thought Balto was too heavy and thick. Instead, he used Balto for hauling freight. Even when hauling freight, Balto had never been used as a lead dog. So Kassan and Balto were 53 miles from Nome. Their job was to bring the serum to Solomon, and other teams would finish the relay to Nome. Driving through deep snow in a storm in which the snow fell so heavily that Kassan couldn't even see the dog closest to the sled, Balto used his nose and stayed on the main trail, missing the turnoff to Solomon. The wind was so fierce that at one point it blew the sled over and tossed the serum into the snow. Kassan had trouble finding the serum and finally took off his gloves to search barehanded. He found the serum but suffered really bad frostbite. When he came to port safety, he was 25 miles from Nome. There was another musher there who was sleeping. Instead of waiting for the other man to organize his team, Kassan decided to keep driving to Nome. He arrived at 5:30 in the morning and collapsed. He's reported to have said, "Damn fine dog," about Balto. By late morning, the serum had been thawed and given to the sick children. Nome's children were saved, all by the bravery of 20 mushers and about 150 dogs. Many of the dogs died that week, and several mushers had serious frostbite injuries. President Coolidge gave each musher a gold medal, and the state gave them $25, but it was Balto and Kassan who were treated as heroes, and the other mushers and teams pretty much ignored by the public. People all over the world had followed the progression of the relay, as radio telegraph news was sent out along the way, and Balto came in first. And then, the newly famous Kassan and Balto toured the United States. Meanwhile, back in Alaska, Seppala was becoming irritated that he and his dog Togo, who had traveled the longest distance, were not recognized for what they had contributed. Plus, Balto was his dog. He went to his and Kassan's boss. What was said is not known, but what had happened is that Kassan was called back to work. Not having enough money to transport the dogs home, he sold them. Balto and his sledmates were part of a small sideshow for a while. After a time, the public became upset at the tacky finish of the dogs' careers, which resulted in fundraising that established a home for them in the Cleveland Zoo. Statues of Balto are in Central Park, New York City, and in Anchorage, near the start of the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race. The Iditarod race began in 1973, partly to memorialize the serum run. After their deaths, the bodies of both Balto and Togo were mounted. Balto is at a museum in Cleveland. Togo is at home at the Iditarod Museum in Wasilla. Plan C. There was some very vocal opposition to using sled dogs for the vital mission. Some felt that airplanes would be a much wiser choice. Later, when a second batch of serum was being sent, they divided the shipment. Half went by sled dog and half was to go by plane. The planes made several attempts, but then gave up. The sled dogs delivered. And that is the end of the story of Balto and Seppala. And we look forward to seeing you guys in the next video, where we'll be talking about and reading the story of Seaman and Meriwether Lewis. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Take good care of yourselves and have a great day. Thanks for watching.